Welcome to the Daily Apple. I'm your host, Kevin White. My occasional co-host, Emma Ryan, and I will dive into all topics related to the science of longevity, along with some other subjects we just find of interest, with the hopes to provide useful information for everyone. This stems from my personal interest to optimize the human condition. To not just live longer, but to live better. You don't need to bathe in ice water or blend cow liver to stay healthy as you age. This is the Daily Apple, where we skip the biohacker noise and focus on what actually works. I'm Dr. Kevin White, founder of Prime Health Associates, and in this episode, I'm joined by Dr. Nicki Byrne and Dr. Matt Kaeberlein for a deep dive into what really drives health span. We're talking about the 4 things that matter most: how you eat, how you move, how you sleep, and how you connect. Plus, what your glucose spikes are trying to tell you, how lean muscle predicts aging, and why blood work should guide your strategy, not stress you out. If you want to feel younger, live smarter, and get ahead of your health without chasing every wellness trend, this one's for you.
I thought it might be nice just to start with each of you letting the audience know how you came to be doing what you're doing. How did you get into what I'm going to call health span medicine? So let's start with Kevin, and then we'll go to Nicki.
Okay. Well, I was first emergency medicine and trauma. And after a while, I kind of realized it was all treating the same stuff. You get into ER because it's very exciting. You make that decision usually whenever you're younger, and the trauma and everything, people say you never know what you're going to see every day. And that's not really true. You kind of get to where you do. I mean, of course, there's the oddballs every once in a while, but for the majority, it's chronic disease over and over and over again. And I was seeing people who even weren't much older than me or even my own age that were, having MIs or real issues. And it made me rethink myself, what I wanted for myself. And, as physicians, we don't take really good care of ourselves in the beginning. You go to the doctor's lounge and you see all the snacks and the soda machines, which are just a setup for insulin resistance and therefore speeding up aging in yourself. And I just didn't want to end up like those rapidly aging people that we see so frequently. And so I got into that for myself. And then one thing led to another as I was getting training. And I thought, let's just do something like that locally. And that led to what I do now.
What about you, Nicki?
My story goes back a little bit longer. My dad was a dermatologist, and he really focused on lifestyle himself. And so when he would see patients, he'd say, I can give you this cream, I can treat that, but you need to work on diet. You need to focus on exercising. He would actually prescribe these things to his patients in dermatology. So I just grew up living that. So I lived that almost my whole life. I took a little break in college, but I've really focused on the pillars of health that we work with here. I was a hospital medicine doctor, so not far from the emergency room. And I had this lady come in. She was in her 80s. She was walking half a mile or hiking. She was swimming half a mile, hiking 3 miles a couple times a week, really active. And she came in with a large stroke. When I went to do her admission, I went through her med list, and she had about 2 pages of supplements and medications. And she told me she saw a local longevity specialist here in Seattle, and his goal was to get all of her labs to be that of a 25-year-old. So that really hit hard. It was just like, this is what people are doing for longevity. And why does someone think a 25-year-old is optimized for health span? They're optimized to have babies. And so I thought I could do it better than that. And so when an opportunity arose with OptiSpan, I decided to come on.
Awesome. That's a really interesting perspective. And I think what you said about some people targeting the biomarker profile of a 25-year-old or whatever, and assuming that's optimal, that's very common. And it's an interesting perspective that, maybe that's not optimal for where you are now. And I definitely can relate to the idea that some of the hoops people jump through are the stacks of supplements they take to try to achieve that goal, which may or may not be misguided, can contribute to problems down the road. So do you think it was anything that she was doing that contributed to her stroke, or was it just sort of the circumstance of the situation?
I don't know, but I know that she was on a lot of estrogen therapy. So as we get older, risk with estrogen therapy does go up. And so I don't know if it was estrogen. I don't know if it was the combination.
Or it just happened, right?
Or it just happened, exactly.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, and I want to talk a little bit more about hormones a little bit later on, because I know you actually just took a test related to hormones. So we'll talk more about that. But before we get there, let's start with an easy question, I think, which is around this, idea of lifespan and health span and how those terms differ, which is, I think, pretty straightforward, but I'd like to hear it in your words, and then how you think about that as we talk about health span medicine. Let's start with Nicki this time.
All right. Well, then you give me the easy one. Lifespan is obviously just how long you live. And then health span is the proportion of that time that you spend healthy. And I think a lot of people focus on longevity measures, but what they're actually really meaning is health span. I have yet to meet someone who wants to live until they're 120 and wants to be bedridden. And so I think most people are meaning health span with that. And so I think it's really important when we talk to our patients to really visualize, what do you want the rest of your life to be? Where do you want to be? And most people want to be living on their own. They want to be active. And then we talk to them about different ways that we can get there.
I agree with that. Health span and lifespan, we've defined that in different ways. But yeah, as far as reverse engineering, figuring out somebody's why, what they want to do when they're 80 or 90. We can all look at our grandparents. What I do is look at, for myself, look at my grandfather, who I'm pretty much a doppelganger of, if you look at pictures and everything, and how he lived in his 80s and how I want to tweak that and be a little bit different.
Was he pretty healthy in his 80s?
No, he ended up with diabetes and ended up getting kind of a sedentary thing. And he had some dementia there later on. So one thing led to another, and cardiovascular disease got him. But playing that differently, and some of those changes made earlier can make a big difference in the trajectory and where you end up. So That's a discussion we have with patients all the time, is like, where do you want to be in your 80s, and looking at things through that lens.
And where you're at now and what do you have to do to get there. Yeah. So that I think is a good lead into, I want to talk about the pillars of health span as we define them at OptiSpan, and just get each of you to give your sort of perspectives on each of those pillars. Like, what do we mean when we say healthy diet, for example, and what are some of the strategies or advice that you give across the board generally to people? So 4 pillars are, of course, eat, move, sleep, connect. So eat refers to nutrition. And I'm interested to know from each of you kind of, what do you see as the big picture there? What does that mean? Obviously, we can very rapidly get into the individual parts of that, but kind of what are the big concepts there?
Your turn.
Right. So really with diet, what I think most people would agree with is you focus on whole, unprocessed foods, first of all. And so I think, when we tell patients, it's easy to say you get what's on the outside of the grocery store and not focus on what's on the inside. And then beyond sticking with whole, healthy, whole, unprocessed foods, we do focus on making sure people are getting enough protein. So we at OptiSpan usually talk about 0.7 to 1 grams per pound of ideal body weight. I know that some people have some higher recommendations. And if someone is really trying to put on muscle, then we might tell them to add a little bit more to that. And we talk about lean proteins. We talk about, leucine-rich proteins to make sure that they have the building blocks to make the muscle that they need. The other big thing that I don't think people take enough of is fiber. And so a lot of patients say, well, I have a big salad at lunch. A big salad at lunch is not enough fiber for the day. Women need about 25 to 30 grams. Men need about 30 to 35.
And that's a minimum, right?
That's a minimum, yeah. And that does change with time of life. These are just general recommendations. Sure. And so a lot of times we're talking about adding psyllium husk and other things, but if you could get that fiber through diet, that would obviously be ideal. And I think one of the other really big things is starting your day with a high protein, low carbohydrate breakfast to really set your metabolism up for the day.
Anything to add or different?
No, I agree with all that, especially the first meal, whatever time that is, making sure that's high quality protein. Always go back to, if man makes it, you got to think twice about eating it if you're fueling yourself with that. And then, the protein piece, for lean muscle, I think of lean muscle as kind of the currency of aging. It's like money in the bank for a rainy day or an emergency. People, for instance, who did poorly during the COVID pandemic, they generally didn't have a good muscle structure. The people that I saw in the hospital during that time. So it's kind of gives you some resilience as you age for a multitude of reasons, which we might get into later. But those are the things agree with everything there.
Yeah. And I know, we use continuous glucose monitoring regularly in our OptiSpan programs. Maybe just take a minute to talk about that, why that's a useful tool, how how that can be used to help people understand what sort of a nutrition program is going to work best for them?
Yeah. So with the continuous glucose monitors, obviously it gives you real-time feedback. And so if you eat something, you can't unsee that glucose spike.
Right.
I remember my first high one was actually a homemade vegetable soup that my husband made me, but it was potatoes, corn, carrots, peas, all the high starchy vegetables. And there was no protein and no fat. And I went all the way up to 160. I mean, it came down quickly, but it does tell you need to add protein, you need to add fat to your meals. And I can never unsee that spike, thinking that vegetable soup was healthy. So it gives you the real-time feedback. The other thing it does also is lets you know, what is your blood sugar doing overnight? What is it doing in the morning when you wake up? Have you been working extra hard to try to keep that number down?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great learning tool, as you said. I think for me personally as well, although mine was from a bagel, so in hindsight, it's not surprising that would cause my glucose to spike. But you're right, you can't unsee it. And so you can learn what triggers your body, how different foods interact with your body. But also, I mean, I do think it is important to say this. A spike is not necessarily bad. And like you said, yours came down quickly.
Yeah.
So that's a good sign that your metabolic system is working the way that it's supposed to. But if you're getting lots of those spikes throughout the day, that's when you start to think, okay, you probably need to change your diet in a way so that, like you said, maybe you have protein with the sugars or whatever, cut out the simple sugars so that you can actually then have more of a consistent metabolic profile. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's obviously extremely important. People get that real-time data, but kind of understanding that if you want to age quickly, maintain a high glucose all the time. If you want to set yourself up to, have cardiovascular disease or all the other things that are going to eat your lunch, you want to speed that up, then have high glucose. So giving you that real-time feedback and stuff is really important. It really changes the behavior. But it can also stress people out if they're on it too long, like myself. So I kind of just maybe a year, every 6 months, just wear one for 2 weeks.
We do 2 weeks where we tell them just to eat normally so they can see what they do. And then we do another 2 weeks where we have them do N of 1 experiments. So they might eat white bread every day and then they swap out whole wheat and see what it does. They might try to do make rice the night before, cool it, and then reheat it and see if that's changed from just eating the white rice. So we usually do the 4 weeks, but we have it broken into eat how you normally eat, see what it does, and then try some things.
Yeah. Okay. I have to ask, since we're talking about eat, so I have discovered keto bread and keto bagels. Any opinions? Do we know?
They're very high in fiber.
They are.
Yeah.
These bagels I'm eating now is from a company called Royo. So shout out to Royo. I think it's like 30 grams of fiber in a bagel.
Wow.
A little bit of an acquired taste. Again, the human taste buds can get look, I like Brussels sprouts now, so you can acquire a taste for all sorts of stuff. But I really like the bread, and I pretty much stopped eating bread, and I'm just waiting to find out that keto bread causes some terrible disease, because anytime it feels like anytime there's something good that you like that seems healthy, it's going to turn out to be bad. But for now, I really like it. So okay, we'll move on to move, and let's start with Kevin on this one. So exercise. How do you again, big picture, recognizing there is no one size fits all, but what are some general principles?
What I'll generally tell people is the best exercise is one you're going to do, because it has to be consistent. So consistency above all else. Generally, I'd want somebody to do resistance weight training, but if you're like somebody who enjoys a class or something, for me to go say, hey, go work out with the trainer, you're going to do it maybe 3 times and say, Kevin, go screw yourself. We're not doing it. So it needs to be something that they're able to do. So the biggest benefit comes from somebody doing nothing to doing something, right? So the biggest benefit is there. So that's really where it gets personalized. In a perfect world, I want somebody to get some sort of, we're going to follow their DEXA scans, want them to maintain a good body composition and, add on some lean muscle. Because again, I just see it as the currency of aging. With the information around that has just really been evolving.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So then, of course, VO2 max, that's a good predictor of how you're going to do in the future. If you've got a poor VO2 max, you're not as long for the world, is the way I see it.
Certainly there's a correlation there. Yeah. I mean, VO2 max is one of the most strongly correlated biomarkers of mortality, at least. So, I don't know necessarily it's a direct causal, although it could be, but certainly it's a predictor of cardiovascular health, right?
Yeah. And I see that like resilience as well. If you've got good, efficient VO2 max, you're burning all your pistons are firing well, then that shows that you've got some resilience to take on whatever comes, illness, et cetera.
Yep. Thoughts on VO2 max testing, different ways that you can do it? Again, I know, in our clinic, we've got the CosMed where you can do the full VO2 max test where you go to failure. And we've got some wearables that can estimate VO2 max. And then we have a device that'll actually do a resting VO2 max. Thoughts on
Well, we've been playing with it on our patients.
The resting VO2 max.
The resting. And the majority of patients, it's been very close, like within one maybe.
Really? These are people that you do it
so
on a treadmill or something?
We have them lay down and we put this little sticky on them. And they don't talk for about 30 seconds. And then it gives us a VO2 max. And then we'll get them on the machine and get an actual VO2 max. And they're really close.
Yeah. Which is great for some people who either have anxiety about doing the VO2 max test or because of health reasons, you wouldn't want to put them through that.
Yeah.
Anything else to add on the move pillar?
I mean, I don't think you really touched on cardiovascular exercise and how much we want people to get out there, really get into the zone 2 exercise. So that's where you can talk. You can talk, but it's a little bit difficult. So you're not singing, you're not having a full conversation, but you're able to talk while you're doing it. So recommending, I mean, we usually stick at OptiSpan with 150 minutes. And if someone's really resistant to getting in
That's a week.
A week, yes. Yeah. And if someone's really resistant to getting in the gym, like you said, what they'll do. We've been talking to a lot of patients about weighting vests. In Seattle, there's a lot of people that are rucking and walking up with just walking around with their weighted vests. So we're jumping on that bandwagon. That puts extra weight on your bones. So especially for women, as we're looking for, preventing osteoporosis. And it's also putting extra weight on your legs and everything else. So that's one thing. And then another thing that we do a lot in more of our elderly patients is focus a lot on balance. So that's another place where, if you're going to fall and you break a hip, that mortality is sky high. Yeah. And so what can we do to prevent someone from falling? And so a lot of different balance exercises.
Yeah. And of course, that's all tied together, right? Because having sufficient musculature is also going to help with balance and agility. But I think that's a good point because that's something that, a lot of times in the influencer world for longevity, it's really just talk about cardio and resistance training and some of these other areas like agility and balance don't get emphasized. Maybe because in the biohacker crowd, that's usually younger people and it's not such an issue, but certainly as people are getting older, it's really, really important. So it's good. Okay. So eat, move, sleep. What do we think about sleep? How do we tackle that?
I guess I'll go first.
Which one of you has the biggest problem with sleep? I guess would be
I may have. This Oura Ring has helped me tremendously.
Okay, we'll get to the Oura Ring, yeah.
Oh, yeah, sleep is... I use the 8 sleep at night, so whenever I travel, it's just everywhere's hot. I'm used to that 8 sleep. Do you use one of those?
No.
Phenomenal. Anyway, sleep is, the more I dig in, the more important I find it to be, because there's inflammatory molecules released from the brain, which I never knew. During deep sleep. And of course, we know about the lymphatic system. And in my family, there's this risk of dementia, which there's some correlation there with, deep sleep and all that. So yeah, I just work with clients to, really focus on the day. In the morning, you have your routine, right? But we need to have our evening routine the night before, because if you have that jacked up, you'll screw up your sleep and the next day is screwed up. So the biggest thing is obviously what we know about is, the sleep hygiene and, the morning of exposure to light, et cetera, and then the evening, getting off screens, which is so hard, because our life is so tight around that stuff. And even I break my own rules more often than not, and I pay the price every time. So, and
how long do you recommend people shut down the screens before they want to go to sleep?
At least an hour and a half, 2 hours is what I would say, but it's not going to happen. So maybe an hour.
Yeah.
And then lights and just being cognizant of some of these things to change what you can. And then if you're going to watch something on TV or whatever, make sure it's nothing that upsets you. We talked
Right.
about, one of my patients where I've said, you can't watch the news after 5:30. You just can't. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something, especially, obviously there are many people who have strong opinions about the current political situation in the United States. And so I think it creates a lot of anxiety on both sides for people. And so, yeah, to the extent you can just, if you have to immerse yourself in that stuff, back off on it before bedtime. I think that's really, and not just political, but anything that creates anxiety for you.
Information that we have access to, I think, has sped up so much and we're not evolved to handle it.
Right. Like for me, I should not watch longevity podcasts an hour before going to bed because it's just going to rile me up with all the nonsense that gets said on those things.
Well, that's actually where my Oura Ring has helped me is I have 2 young kids at home. And so I get home from work, I take care of the kids. And then after they go to bed, I'm pulling my computer out every single night and working. And I'd realize on the days that I did that, after I put the computer away, it would take about 45 minutes to go to sleep. And if I put the computer away and, read, I actually do usually read the news, but in a magazine format, I fall asleep within 10 minutes. So that's where I feel like the Oura Ring has really helped me. I can be on the computer in the blue light up until the magazine, but I just have to not have that be the last moment in my mind is wrapping myself in.
Yeah. And I think that's important because people are different, right? So the same routine won't necessarily work for everyone. Like for me, I have really no issues with being on the screen, but like you, if I read, especially if it's something, that's fun and not gonna, give me anxiety or whatever, my eyes get tired and I go right to sleep. And so I don't struggle, at least yet, we'll see how long that lasts, with some of the things that other people do struggle with to try to get to sleep.
Yeah. Another thing that I've been doing lately is taking a walk after dinner. That's kind of almost become a non-negotiable.
All right, now see, you went back into the move.
I did.
Which is good. No, actually, it's good because these things are all tied together, right?
True.
If you're not exercising and eating a crappy diet, your sleep quality is likely to suffer, and vice versa. If your sleep quality is low, it's going to be hard to stick to your healthy diet, harder, or to get your exercise the next day. So all of these things fit together. But anyway, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. So you take a walk after dinner.
Yeah.
Good for glucose
control,
insulin, exercise. So yeah, all good.
And then just being out and breathing and all that stuff. Do you do any like breathing exercises or anything like that?
I've been told I should do them.
We do incorporate that into our program, that we're going to get to the connect pillar, right? But I think that there are, for certain people, that is one of the approaches that our HealthSpan coaches recommend.
Yeah.
So Oura Ring, useful tool to track sleep. Any other tips? I think it's kind of obvious, but we're saying, don't drink caffeine if you're sensitive to caffeine late in the day. Alcohol is a good one. Yeah, that's one that there seems to be, again, as much as there's ever consensus on anything in the health related field, there seems to be pretty good consensus that alcohol, especially after dinner, is likely to have a very negative impact on your sleep quality. And the Oura Ring 100% will tell you that.
Yeah.
I think I've mentioned it before, but I've often wondered if the people who started Oura are teetotalers who are totally against alcohol and they rig the algorithm. A single drop of alcohol is going to trash your sleep score. No, it seems to be universal. Like I haven't yet to meet anybody who's like, yeah, I can go out and have 4 drinks and my Oura Ring says I slept great. So
yeah, breathing, 4-7-8 breathing or box breathing.
Kind of relax.
Often wake up in the middle of the night, my mind will be like twirling around, let's chew on this problem for a while, Kevin. And then, but if I do the breathing exercise, and every time I do it, I'm like, dang it, this isn't going to work. This is so stupid. And then, but I'll do it 4-7-8 breathing for about 3 or 4 rounds. And then after that, let my breathing take its normal course and just focus on that breathing and then think about 3 things I'm thankful for. It works. I wake up in the morning then.
Yeah.
After that happens.
Great tip.
But yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
So connect.
Yep.
4th pillar. So this, encompasses both human relationships and mindfulness, personal connection to the world around you. How do we approach that?
I mean, it's a very big topic. In terms of connect to others, I think we can look at what happens in the blue zone. People are interconnected with their communities for so long. They're not, placed in nursing homes. They're not living with their family. They're having visitors. And so we can really see how important it is to stay connected. So one of the easiest ways to talk to people about the connect is, how are you actually connecting? Mm-hmm. Do you have a dog in your house? Do you have anyone else in your home with you? Are you getting out in the community? Do you volunteer? Do you feel like you add value? Because I think that's a big part of connect, is adding value to the world around you. So that's one of the obvious ways to think about connect. And obviously, as you said, we can take this in a lot of different directions.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the human connection part, I mean, for me personally, I've talked about it before on the podcast, is something where, if I was to really take an honest look at my 4 pillars a few years ago, I had work to do in all of them, but that's the one that I'd paid the least attention to. And, obviously we won't give the name, but there was one of our OptiSpan clients early on who, and you see this sometimes in the sort of longevity enthusiast community, who was like deep in the weeds on nutrition and exercise and sleep and all the wearables and all the biomarkers, and just wouldn't talk about connect, like did not want to have any human relationships if at all possible. It seemed like. And, I think was really suffering because of that. So I think, obviously, again, it's going to be different. Maybe some people can be perfectly happy without any human relationships, meaningful relationships. But the vast majority of people, I think this is an area, particularly for men, that tends to get neglected as we get older. And of course, it ties back into all the other pillars as well. And then the other piece of it would be the sort of mindfulness, groundedness, being present. And this is where I think connect is hard for me in some ways to really put a boundary on it, because there's also a emotional and mental health component there. So I don't know if you have any sort of different ways that you approach this in your practice or think about it with your patients.
Yeah, actually just over the past 3 or 4 days, I was doing some reading on this, and they were talking about how it's good for neuroplasticity as you develop new relationships. If you stay in the same relationships, maybe you have 3 friends and think, I don't need anybody, and you just deal with the same thing every day. It's like driving to work the same way every day. By changing things up, having new relationships, that it causes your brain it has a good effect with cognition, is my point.
Yeah,
so
that's actually, I think, a really good point, that when you create a new friendship, a new relationship, or there are other ways you can change what's happening in your life, your sort of cognitive map has to adjust to that. And that drives neuroplasticity. And, the episode that I did with Emma Payne on grief, this came up as well, that a significant grief or bereavement, also one of the positives that comes out of that is an increase in neuroplasticity, because your brain has to sort of recalibrate to that new reality, right, of the thing that's not there anymore.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's probably the hardest pillar from a quantitative perspective, because we don't really have great biomarkers. We do use some assessment tools, but those are sort of self-reported. And then you can look at stress. We'll talk a little bit about some of the stress biomarkers in a minute. But outside of that, it's kind of hard beyond just having conversations with people to really assess where they're at in the connect pillar.
We spend a lot of time talking to our patients about stress and anxiety in the connect pillar. And one of the things that we always like to say is it's not stress management, it's not anxiety management, it's your relationship to stress. Stress isn't inherently bad, and it's not something that we need to manage. And I actually think it's really good for personal resilience to be able to sit with what's uncomfortable and take a moment. And I also think that's a really great opportunity to talk to people a little bit kind of like cognitive behavioral therapy, where if something is bothering them, to be able to teach them that you could reframe that thought. So how else could this have happened? Or let's say I sent a long email to Matt and he wrote back just okay. I could say, well, he thought my email was dumb. Or can I reframe that and think he's busy? He actually wrote okay to let me know he got it, but he hasn't even read it yet. There's a lot of different scenarios.
I read your emails immediately upon receipt.
Immediately. But I'm just saying, like, I think in the Connect pillar is a really good place to try to help people be able to reframe things. And I think that helps a lot with their relationship with stress and anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree with that, though. It's the stress response. is the key there.
Yeah,
So
and
how
I
do you
think
deal with
some
that?
people do ask why isn't stress its own pillar, right? I've had several people ask me that, and you could make it. Some people do that; they have a fifth or a sixth or an eighth or a 12th pillar, but I think stress weaves through all of the four pillars of health, right? They all impact stress, and stress can impact those pillars. So in that way, it's sort of a connecting point between all the pillars of health. But like you said, it's not good or bad. It's something that can be either, and we all have to deal with it, right? In different ways. Learn how to experience stress. And
stress in a lot of ways can be really good. Stressing your body during a hard physical activity, stressing yourself by stepping outside your comfort zone, it really does, I think, help with your resilience.
Yeah, absolutely. And self-confidence sometimes. If you can get through a really stressful event, right? You're like, okay, I did it.
This conversation is just getting started. In part 2, we'll get into the blood work, what to measure, what it means, and how we use it at Prime Health to shape real health strategies for our patients. If you're ready to go deeper into inflammation, hormones, genetic testing, and more, make sure you're following the Daily Apple wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're looking for personalized concierge care built around performance, prevention, and health span, you can learn more about us at primehealthassociates.com. I'm Dr. Kevin White. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us on Apple and Spotify, and please review us to let us know what you think. Thanks.